Well, welcome everybody. I'm Nathan Lee, and I'm in the Pacific Northwest Washington part of the United States. And today I'm with Ines, and I'll let her introduce herself, and we'll get started with a conversation about being the change as horse people.
Yeah, so my name's Ines. I'm on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland in Australia.
Yes. Well, thank you everyone for being here, and obviously Ines, really excited to have this conversation with you today. And it's been great to connect with you, just briefly beforehand, and really excited about the ideas and the topics that we're bringing forth today.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Yeah, were you going to say something? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really excited. Just so everyone knows, this is my first sort of live recording session, but I'm really excited to have a really good conversation with Nathan and bring up some topics, facilitate that change.
Nice. So we're going to have three segments of this talk. We're going to start out by, in this time, talking about imposter syndrome and how that shows up in the broader equine industry, and then obviously within our sort of adjacent sector of EMH and EAL in the horse industry. And then we'll follow this up with a talk about leading by example as horse people. And then we'll conclude by having a talk on public education in the broader horse industry, and what that kind of looks like in terms of the previous talks that we're going to have around imposter syndrome and leading by example. So they'll be a nice blend and sort of be a nice comprehensive talk the way we have them lined up. So with imposter syndrome, kind of a big topic, and certainly something that I think a lot of us are incredibly familiar with, especially if we're in the horse industry. I know for myself, I grew up with horses, and both my parents, were trainers, and despite all that, like I feel as though there's just so much to know about horses, and despite my background and growing up with horses, I feel like I really just know the tip of the iceberg when it comes to everything that there is to know about horses. Because if we consider like the genetics and nutrition and foot care and teeth, body work, and just understanding the various pathologies, let alone like environmental and social needs, there's just so much to understand about horses. And it can feel pretty overwhelming and pretty easy to slip into that imposter syndrome of feeling as though we just can't possibly know enough, and that what do we really have to offer when there's so many elements of the horse industry that we just have a pretty minimal grasp on.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a big one for me. I came into the horse industry in my early 20s, so quite a lot later than a lot of other people. So I found that for me, the imposter syndrome is just huge. I really get that feeling sometimes that I just never quite know enough, or there's always someone who'll have a better answer than me, or someone who knows a little bit more than me. So I think it's really good for us to sort of reflect on that and be like, no, you've actually got this, you know what you're doing, and it's okay. And you can only sort of learn what you can learn. Like you can listen to all these podcasts and read all these books, but just doing the best that you can to try and learn what you need to know to keep your horses happy and healthy. And yeah.
Definitely. And I think there's, a good number of really great groups out there that acknowledge that it really takes a multidisciplinary team to, really effectively care for our horses. And, like Equitopia is one group in particular that I'm quite familiar with. And they really instill this idea that, it's okay not to know everything. And it isn't our job to know everything, and that we can rely on a number of these other professionals that that's really what they do. And, we really care about our horses, and we really want to invest a lot into their care. So of course we have, this emotional component where we really want to, do everything we can to just, understand and be able to, provide that really great care to our horses.
Yeah.
But also allowing ourselves to kind of let that go a little bit and rely on, those professionals that that this is what they've invested their life into, to a great lengths.
Yeah, exactly. We can't expect ourselves to know everything. Like a farrier spends so many years learning about what they need to know, and the body worker and your vet, and you're so much better off having such a multidisciplinary team. We're going to look after your horses and trying to expect one person or just your vet, for instance, to know absolutely everything about your horse. You're so much better off having a big team with you, who knows your horse, who knows what they're doing, because we can't study everything. So
Most definitely, yes. Because it can be, it's really overwhelming to consider like what it would actually take of us to really feel as though we had all the answers, and we might even be fooling ourselves to actually think that we could have all the answers, because it is certainly in my experience, I've noticed that I can sort of latch onto something and feel as though, okay, yeah, this is really making a huge difference in my ability to connect with horses, and then a year or two later, I find a new way that's even better. And so as we continue to evolve, we really recognize that even the things that we did know, we can improve, and we can continue to progress in our abilities to provide that great care for our horses too.
yeah, absolutely. And I really, really resonate with that. As I've sort of moved on in what I do with horses, it's crazy to think about what I was doing 3-4 years ago compared to what I'm doing now, and how I'm interacting them, and really what I know about their care and looking after them. So I think it changes with not only disciplines, but what you're doing with them and how you're interacting with them as well.
Yeah, most definitely. Most definitely.
Mm.
And you brought up like disciplines. I know that there's just so many factions of disciplines and forms of riding and showing, and then there's all these associations that are incredibly like breed specific. And while diversity is great, it can also be really isolating. It can kind of create these silos within the industry where I know for myself, like growing up in more of like the Western culture, and then going into more of the English dressage, eventing barns as I wanted to grow and really develop my skills as an equestrian. That's where my imposter syndrome would really show up, is when I felt like I was like a fish out of water. And but yet at the same time, I look back and recognize that those were probably the most pivotal and like robust growing experiences for me, by really getting out there and feeling like that fish out of water, and as though I had no business even maybe being in some of those barns and riding some of those like remarkable like athletic horses, but through time being able to really appreciate those struggles, and those being flooded with the imposter syndrome, and how over time I was able to recognize some growth in really meaningful ways because of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, especially for me, when I'm sort of thrown in the deep end and you swim, you learn so much. I find that if you're sort of just, yeah, like I said, thrown in, and you've got people around you who can help you, you can learn so quickly and learn what you really need to know to continue on with that. So discipline. Yeah.
Most definitely, yes. I coming into this talk, I really try to sit with sort of the core of my personal struggles as an equestrian, and where I feel like the imposter syndrome has shown up, and really honestly like continues to show up for me. And I feel like I sort of in some way have these like unrealistic expectations that I could make more immediate change in terms of the impact that I can have on people, and wanting to see that be more wide scale, to really promote the welfare of horses and really do what I can to limit the suffering of horses. But having to accept that like unrealistic feels like a really strong word. But the fact of the matter is, so much of the change that I really recognize as a coach or as a therapist in the EAMH field, it's far more residual. It's oftentimes where I perceive most of the change happening is through my students, who end up having students of their own.
Yeah.
And then they come back to me and talk about, the inclusion of mindfulness, the notions of like co-regulation, how those aspects not only just remarkably changed who they are as a horse person, but as a coach and as a riding instructor, or a practitioner of some sorts. And it can feel at times kind of daunting that, so much of the change that we have is those cascading effects that are kind of out of sight for us unless people come back and give us that reflection. Um, and I think that's, for me, where the imposter syndrome seems most relevant. That I really want to make those big immediate changes, and I really want to see that progress being made of really bringing attention to horse welfare and the idea of like consent in their participation, but also having to take that step back and recognize that I am making a huge change. It's just that I might not see it materialize, as quickly in front of me as I would like.
Yeah, absolutely. And I, again, really, really resonate with that. It's just that thought that I'm not doing enough, but what you are doing is enough, and the people that you are affecting can make great change. And I think just the small little ways that for me, that I'm helping people or showing people how to be around horses when I'm working with them, that's just a few more people. And then perhaps they're going to tell their friends, and they're going to work with their families in regards to how they're working with horses. And that change is, like you said, very residual, and it flows on. And whilst we might not see it, it's still happening and it's still there.
Yes, for sure. And it is great. Yeah, I think many of us could probably relate to that, we really deeply care about horses, and obviously our clients within, the EAL and EMH industry, but, really, really wanting to see, a lot of change in terms of just, sort of the state of equine welfare, because it's pretty easy to look around and see circumstances where that could definitely improve, and at the same time, recognizing that we are doing a lot. We it's pretty easy to undervalue the impact and the effect that we are having, and obviously that's kind of an elemental factor of imposter syndrome is to really undermine the successes that we do have.
Yeah, exactly.
I think like the final like bullet point or something that was kind of standing out for me that I'm curious if you relate to in some way too, Ines, is that I know that, so I kind of mentioned this earlier, but I coming into the EAMH field and EAL field, I was really into like natural horsemanship, and was really finding that to be sort of like a central hub for me. That's like kind of where I identified in many ways in the horse industry. And then, of course, as we begin to improve our ability to like conduct research with horses, and especially in regards to like biomarkers and being able to really get some pretty robust indicators of stress in the horses, and it has been certainly humbling to take that perspective taking and go, wait a minute, this approach that I was so invested in and sort of identified with, I'm now needing to show a little bit of that conviction or that affiliation with sort of like a pure model, and being able to recognize that that is part of the growth process. And while that can in some ways sort of trigger that imposter syndrome of, oh, what do I really know? I'm having to constantly change my mind and like reevaluate my process and my growth as a horse person. But I think if we're really being honest with ourselves, I think a lot of us are going through that process too, because I think even with a team of incredible multidisciplinary equestrian professionals, I think all of them would definitely admit that they're constantly growing and changing and having to reevaluate and learn to improve their approach.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think with horses, and especially because each horse is so individual, you might have to change what you're doing with each horse that's in your herd as well. So it's not a one size fits all. So what you've been doing for the past 3 years with one horse, you get a new horse that comes, and you have to throw out everything that you were doing because it just doesn't work, and you continue to learn as you go along. So yeah, completely agree with that.
I love that in terms of sort of individualistic care and really taking the time to be present enough with the horse to, read those indicators of what it is that they're needing. That can be remarkably different than, the hundreds of horses that you've seen before.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice. Well, Ines, I've really enjoyed this topic and discussing it with you, and I look forward to continuing to dive into these topics about how we're being the change as horse people, and I'll look forward to speaking with you tomorrow and continuing this conversation.
Great. Sounds great. Thank you so much, Nathan. That was fantastic. Lovely to chat.
Awesome.
All right.
You take care.
Bye.